on one concept of man, that is concept of economic, and he tried to maximize his earning. But Hawthorne experiment said the opposite. That is, man is basically a social man. He wants to get the approval of the group and wants to be part of the group. And even in that process, he compromises his basic economic needs. One of the example of that experiment, they noted that there was organizational norms of productivity and there was a group norms of productivity, so that to protect the weaker members of the group, if so that they were not some members left out due to less productivity. They compromise their economic needs just to protect other weaker member of group, and later on human relation schools emerge into more evolved school, and not just human school but as a behavior school too. Major contribution is done by a person called Abraham Maslow, who proposed hierarchy of needs, starting with basic physiological needs, safety needs or security needs, social needs, and to esteem needs. Then finally self-actualization need, which is related to human being desire to achieve what he wants, to what they are capable of achieved. And from these a concept emerged that man is not just a social or economic man. Actually, man is a complex man, and he is guided by different needs at different point of time. Then we discuss the third school, which is management science school, how it emerged and what is it about and how it get popularity. So it emerged during World War II. During World War II, Great Britain faced many issues related to military operations. They realized that they need something more, so they gather a team of scientists, a team of mathematicians, people experimenting math and science, and they call it operational research team. This team gave them a technical breakthrough, a strategic solution, and when America entered World War II, America also follows the same process. And once World War II ended, this operational research team joined, applied to industry and organization. They were able to find solution of complex solutions, and there were issue of there were issue of transportation, very complex issue of communications. So they called operational research team and they help the manager to find solution to this problem. Operational research team help industries in tactical intelligent solution to their complex problems. And in this process, over the years, research team develop procedures which is called management science school, in which they develop cost management, management information system, decision science, and related phenomena, which collectively forms management science school. And we see that in this operation research team used to take help of facts and figures. They used to analyze the numbers and made judgment on the basis of analysis and provide solution to the organization. Then we discuss how the management science school get popularity over years. There are two phenomena for the popularity of management science schools. First was development of high-speed computers. High, high-speed computers were developed in the post-war period. It helps in solving complex issues of organization by communicating through computers. And the second one is Robert McNamara, who is considered as the key component of management science school. The journal He joined the Harvard Business School for his MBA, and after completion of his MBA, he was offered an assistant professor, and he joined the Harvard Business School as an assistant professor at a youngest age of 24. And later during World War II, McNamara also joined Army's Department of Statistical Control, and when he joined that, he observed few problems, and he realized that there was no technique to trace the aircraft, to track the crews, or to track the crew members. There was no technique to allocate fuel. So he developed a technique to track the aircraft, to track the people, to track the crew members, and the fuel allocated. And they can monitor spare parts and how well they are working. Later in 1946, McNamara joined operational research team, and that team joined Ford Motors. Once he joined Ford Motors, He realized that Ford was not using facts and figures, so he started doing that. And with the help of facts and figures, the Ford Motors faced major transformations. The financial turnaround was at Ford remarkable. He continued with Ford Motors and focusing on seatbelt. In fact, Ford's cars were the first car to use seatbelt, and that time passengers were scared about it. But he followed his instinct and he worked in those lines. He also worked on safety features. And then we discuss another example was that in airplane when boarding time allowed and the passengers are lined up in it took up more time. So to reduce that time, researchers found a method to minimize the time by helping the passengers to board according to their seat numbers. Like the people who seated in the right back side of the plane boarded first, then people who seated in the middle of the plane boarded second, and so on. And this whole phenomena is known as reverse pyramid. Then we discuss the equation which we can see various factors affect any company's profit and loss, like consumer demand, cost of raw material, price of product, etc. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nazim. Next, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammad Tausif Raza, and I am here to present the recap of the classes which held on the Thursday. Actually, in the earlier classes, we were discussing morely about the scientific management schools, and now I will be discussing about the two topics, that is mainly the human relation school and the management sciences school. Firstly, I would like to give a brief idea about that how human relation in schools is actually differ from the earlier school which we have discussed earlier, like the human scientific school. All the experiments which were conducted in the human scientific school were actually which based on the like things, illuminations, and how we can enhance or decrease the productivity just by certain things, like the illuminations and the machine factors we were taking. But in the human relation school, our primarily focus on the humans. How the productivity of a human can be increased just by focusing on the human and their personal needs. Sir gave the basic idea about that. It's not all about the paying the workers fairly. It's all about treating the workers fairly. So it gives a good idea about that. And from that concept, that place only, the human relation school emerged. And sir also told about that how human behave differently in the different situations. This can be justified later. And I will be telling about how the hackathon conducted number of experiments from the last 8 years and finally reached to the conclusion. The scientific management primarily focused on that the human is like a economic man. He all his motive is like that. He want to maximize his earning and not less than that. But in actual scenario, man is different. So Hawthorne said that that is the opposite thing. Man is not the simple man which you see. He is actually the social animal. He wants to get the approval of the group. He wants to work in the team. He never wants to be segregated or in the isolation. So after that, Alton Mayo also joined his team in the Hawthorne experiment, which he was actually working in the electric company, which actually manufactures the telephone rings. And he also gave many, I think, contributions to the work of Hawthorne. After that, uh, he also the major contribution was also given by the scientist named as Maslow. He also proposed the hierarchy of needs that is actually starting from the physiological needs to the security needs to the social needs to the esteem needs and finally to the self-actualization needs. Sir gave Sir explained about every needs, which were actually what physiological needs includes, what security needs includes, what social needs includes, what esteem needs include, and what self-actualization needs. Actually, we have a lesser span of time, so I would like to include as much as I can. So from here, actually, what I have said earlier, that the actual picture of man is not like that. He only thinks about the earning. He actually, whenever comes to the compromise his personal needs, whenever comes to the work in the team, he can compromise his personal needs. So from the human relation school, it was clearly mentioned that a human motivation and human environment is much important in order to enhance the productivity. So this was all about the conclusion of the, I think, Hawthorne experiment, and which was conducted by also Lord Mayo. After that, Zari ma'am started the discussions on the human management sciences school. In these things, mainly three things we are going to discuss: that what is actually management sciences school is, and uh, uh, and after that, how during the World War II, Britain faced many problems, like in the military operation primarily. So they realized that why don't we make the team which consists of the scientists and physicists and the I think mathematicians. So they called the team, and they consist of the physicists, mathematicians, and scientists. They finally evaluate and analyze all the things which they were seeing, which they were evaluating around them, and finally give so many conclusions. And they give the strategic solutions and the tactical solutions also. That all the solutions which were provided by these teams, operation research team mainly, which were also asked by the US team when they entered into the World War II. So operation research team mainly focuses on the whatever the data they gains from, whatever the I think facts and figures they gain from by observations. So they go on the mathematical modeling and the science part, and then finally give the suggestions how to enhance the things and how to do the work in a better manner. So so it's all about the collecting the facts and figures, and finally give the judgment on the basis of what they have collected the data, and provide the solutions. Now, lastly, I would like to include that the how the management sciences school gained the popularity. Management sciences school gained the popularity mainly by two things. That is, first, by the introduction of the computer. Introduction of computers facilitates the easy communications, and which also solves the mathematical modeling in a very less span of time. We all know, who are from the science background, we all know that whenever we do modeling, it takes a lot of span of time by when we are doing like things from by hand. But when we are doing the things from the computer, it takes very less span of time, a few seconds to an hour. So due to the introduction of computer, it became very easily to solve a lot of problems. And the second reason was the McNamara. McNamara, we all know that he was the youngest professor who graduated from the Harvard Business School. At the age of 25, he was appointed as the assistant professor in Harvard Business School, where he was actually graduated from. So McNamara joined also the army when it was World War II, and saw many problems, analyzed many problems, like ma'am gave the example of allocation of the fuels, uh, tracking of the crews, tracing of the, I think, aircrafts. So he gave many solutions. After that, they returned to the industries like Ford Motors, and saw many problems and gave the solutions. This was all about from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Nazim. Your name is Nazim?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Tausif, both of you did a good job in terms of covering the entire content. Now your next challenge is how to present it within the allotted 5 minutes. So both of you exceeded the time limit. And what happens is that when we have a 50 minutes class to cover, naturally it is very difficult to cover it in 5 minutes. But that is what is expected of you at this juncture. So we have one of the C of effective communication, which we call compactness. So try to be more compact. In terms of delivery, Nadeem, you did a reasonably good job, but perhaps you have to be slightly more expressive with body language. So you had a slightly, what I can use the term fixed kind of body posture. Your hands were not moving. Overall, you were not expressing yourself, reinforcing your verbal communication with your non-verbal communication. So that is something which you need to learn. I think language also needs a bit of polishing, and especially the pronunciation of some of the words. Second, for example, there were many words which you were not pronouncing correctly. So have feedback from your friends and see if you can smoothen out these snacks. Okay. But content-wise, it was a good presentation. And Tausif, you also did a very good job. In fact, I'm impressed by your performance. So you tried to make it interesting and lively, and this is
Thank you, sir.
This is a good thing. And keep working on this. You will evolve your own style, but try to be more compact next time. Okay, so it was slightly longish.
Sure, sir. Sure.
So now coming to the three schools that we have already covered, and we have already discussed the limitations of each of these schools separately. Like, for example, we talked about the scientific management school of Frederick Taylor, and we noted that he looked at one side of the enterprise, and he thought that man will be happy just if you pay him well. But then we realized that this is only one side of human beings. Human beings have other sides as well, and we got to know of it through social needs that human beings have, and which were brought out by Human Relations School. Then we had Management Science School, which primarily focused too heavily on use of science in solving management problems. And we have already shared the context of Second World War, and how Second World War was very different from the First World War. When you have a combat situation and it's more like a one-to-one kind of combat, the bravery has a different definition, isn't it? You have to have a different kind of courage. But World War II was fought on technological plank. So when you, for example, what bravery you require for dropping a bomb on Hiroshima or Nagasaki? You need precision planning. That's all you need, isn't it? And you will come back safe because you are moving at a particular pace, and you know where you have to drop it. You have done your calculations, and then you will return. You will turn your aircraft immediately after dropping it, and you will come back to your base. And that action of yours may kill more than 6 lakh people. So you need, it was not a bravery. It was more of, the planning. And we thought that we will be able to win the war like this. But McNamara, both of you have talked about him. There are things which again are related to human needs, larger human needs. For example, one of the basic human need is to do a meaningful work. So if the soldiers find that they are being sent to fight another war and it is not a meaningful work for them, they will not be interested. In fact, they may be demotivated. And this is the reason why the US lost Vietnam War so badly against a very small country, because soldiers had no spirits. They were just thinking that this is a wrong war we are fighting. This is not our war. Why we are sent here? Why we are losing lives here in jungles of Vietnam? So those are the questions that are actually important. So I would use an analogy, a beautiful analogy, which I read in the form of a poem, and I will just share a few parts of it. And it is about the title is "The Blind Man and the Elephant," and the poem is like this: that it was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, and that each by observation might satisfy his mind. So these 6 people, they went to feel an elephant, what an elephant is like, and they were visually impaired. So each one of them tried their own way. So the first one, he happened to fall on the sturdy side, the broad and the sturdy side, and he said, "Okay, elephant is like a wall." Then the other one touched the squirming trunk with his hands, and he said, "Elephant is very much like a snake." And then the other one said, who touched the front part of it, and he said, "Okay, elephant is very much like a tree," when he touched his legs. Now, the one who touched the ears, he said, "Elephant is very much like a fan." Now, what do you think? Are they wrong? So each one is looking at or feeling a different part of the elephant. So for one who touches the tail, says elephant is very much like a snake. Somebody says it is very much like a tree. Somebody says it's very much like a fan. Or somebody says it's like a wall. So are they wrong?
No, sir, they were correct according to their perception.
They are correct. But the problem is their perception, the very right term that you have used, their perception is incomplete. They have not seen the full beast. So they are not wrong, but they are incomplete. And this is the case with all the schools of management thought which we have studied up till now. They are not wrong. What they are emphasizing is an important part. We know that there is a science involved in decision making, especially decisions which are routine decisions. And now it has been pushed to another extreme, and you now hear of Internet of Things, data mining, and this social media and how people are using Facebook. I mean, you can draw a lot of inferences through that data mining, and there is a course which you will study in second year, big data analytics. So there is a science involved in each decision making, but there are things which are beyond that also. Likewise, yes, streamlining the operations as recommended by Taylor is a very important thing. But then this too has its own limitations, and we have seen it in greater detail. So keeping these limitations in mind, how do we look at the complete elephant? How do we look at that complete beast so that we can understand it in totality, not in parts? And that is your job as a manager. Your job is to draw insights from each of these schools. And they give wonderful insights. And each of these schools, continues to grow on its own also. But we have to ask this vital question as to what ensures enduring success in the long run. And unfortunately, for answering this question, no one school will be enough. And we have to understand it in totality. And there have been attempts to evolve this integrated understanding. And the schools that have emerged, they cannot be called full-fledged schools, but they are perspectives. But the basic idea is this, that we should be able to see the complete beast. And we should not see the parts only. And the first school in this category, we can call it integration schools, because they try to integrate these various perspectives which we have shared in the last 4 or 5 sessions, ever since we started talking about schools. So there is a school in this integration school which we call systems approach. In fact, it is better if we call them approaches rather than schools, because from schools we get an idea that it is a full-fledged development of an idea, like Taylor was. So the first approach which tried to integrate various aspects is the systems approach. Now, what is this systems approach? Now, when you look at a system, the system has its subsystems. So whenever you look at any system, you have to see how these subsystems work and interact with each other. For example, let us take the case of university, our own university. Now, if you want to understand AMU, how can you understand AMU? Can you understand AMU without understanding its residential side? So AMU has a very strong subsystem within it, and that is what we call the residential side of it. And why AMU continues to be so patronized by its alumni, it is not simply because of the academics, it is also because of the residential side of it. Even now, people have very strong affiliations to the halls, the residents of the hall whom they have stayed with. So if you want to understand AMU, you have to look at it in terms of its subsystems also. That is the basic idea of systems approach. So, and these subsystems, they interact. So if something bad happens or something untoward happens in the one subsystem, for example, residential side, I remember there was a situation when there was overcrowding in the hostels, and it impacted the academics. Many times they were not able to control the arrival of the students, and especially we hold classes at 8 a.m. in the morning, and many of the students would complain, sir, getting up early in the morning and then getting ready for the class is a huge challenge because there is so much of crowding in the bathrooms. Now, this is a situation where one subsystem is interacting with the other subsystem. So that's one concept of a systems perspective. The other aspect of a systems perspective is its link with the environment. So interdependencies within the system in terms of how subsystems interact, and then as a whole how this system interacts with the external environment. And no system worth its name can be an isolated system. it has to interact with the environment, and it draws its influence from the environment. So, for example, if the government is changing its priority of education, for example, there was a time when higher education was the holy cow of the government, and we developed higher education institutions with a lot of pride. We created IITs, we created IIMs, we created central universities, like for example Jawaharlal Nehru University, which became country's pride. But suppose now the government changes its priority and focuses more on skill development part of it, not on higher education. So naturally it will have its implications on how you arrange the funds for yourself. Because sooner or later, the government support to higher education system would be gradually withdrawn. And this is what we are witnessing in the world. We are witnessing in the country also. So how a system, this is what we call the concept of systems boundary. There is a boundary which separates a system from its external context, but this boundary is always very, very porous. And yes, some systems are less interacting with the environment, but majority of the systems, so they may be called closed system. But you can hardly have an example of a pure closed system. Some people say jails are a closed system. They don't interact with the external environment. But even there are linkages, isn't it? So you have to understand the concept of systems boundary, isn't it? And if we look at a problem in its totality like this, a systems perspective, maybe we'll be able to evolve a more comprehensive understanding of the system. So that's one approach. Then there is a second category of approach which is a part of it only, and it draws basically it draws heavily from economics, and we call it the contingency approach. The economist also, whenever you ask them a question, for example, what would be the rate of inflation, let us say in next 6 months, they would never give a clear-cut answer. They would always specify the conditions. They would say it depends. So the most favored expression for economist is it depends. So there cannot be a cut and right answer to questions. For example, if you ask this question, how to motivate students, can there be one answer to this? It depends. For example, it depends which group of students you are talking about, at which level. Are they pursuing professional course? Are they pursuing a normal kind of MA and MSc? Then you have to understand the student's own profile. What engages them? So contingency approach suggests that don't try to search for universal answers. Always understand the conditions first, and then try to evolve your answers. And this is a kind of approach which is recommended for managers also, and that is why their judgment will also always be required. To what extent human factors are responsible? To what extent technological factors are important? So we have switched over to online classes. Now, how do you ensure that technology and human factors, they work in tandem? How do we use technology effectively? How do we train our teachers so that they can leverage the technology platforms? And we have seen in the university some teachers living up to that challenge very effectively. I And that is possible because the managers at the helm, they are thinking of ways to engage with teachers as to how to engage, how to use technology platforms. So again, the point is, there cannot be one answer. That is the crux of the contingency approach. Then there are a third category of approaches which we can call contemporary approaches, or some people call it neo-human relations approaches, where people are emphasizing, the thinkers are emphasizing the importance of softer factors as opposed to hard factors. Hard factors like technology, soft factors like human feelings. And there have been series of researches on this account, and there have been literature which has emerged. The first one was a book which was published in 1980, early 80s. And the title of the book was In Search of Excellence. And it was a record of those companies who have maintained excellence for substantially long period of time, more than 20 years. Was that, I mean, in order to fall into that bracket of excellent companies, they put that condition that they must be excellent for more than 20 years. And they studied various companies, and based on that, they proposed certain principles. Like, for example, they noted that these companies have, they stick to their knitting. That was the term they used. They stick to the knitting. They do what they are good at. So, for example, if AMU is good in teaching, it would focus on teaching. Likewise. So they don't spread themselves too thinly. That was one of the factors which they identified. So so there was a urge or desire to find out some unique common factors which ensure the success of an organization. And then this stream of thought was carried forward by other researchers also. Especially there are two books which Jim Collins wrote, and the title of these books were, one was The Build to Last, and other was Good to Great. So how organizations survive beyond 40 years? And organizations built to last, for example, which will not die. Our own institution, AMU, is one such organization. No, it has we are celebrating 100th year of establishment as a university. As a institution, we have been there since 77 now, at least. So it's a long history, and why AMU continues to be one of the university to reckon with in the country. Various ranking agencies have ranked it in top 5 universities. So what are those factors? So actually, in fact, there was another study which I remember I read. It was by a British professor called The Living Company. And this study was sponsored by a company called Shell, a very famous multinational company. And when it became a 100-year-old company, it sponsored this study and hired this British professor and gave him this brief that you study all such companies which have survived more than 100 years and try to understand the wisdom from their working. And can we distill some common wisdom? So there have been attempts to distill such common wisdom which can finally ensure enduring success of an organization. And if you read such stuff, you will try to understand that there are some factors. For example, in the context of AMU, what do you think is the core strength which helps us survive so long? and the institution continues to grow. Despite problems here and there, but if you were, especially those of you who have studied it and have been part of it for a substantially long period of time, what do you think could be the factors which then, if understood first and then replicated in any organization, it would make the organization a long-lasting organization? Do you have some reflections on this? What are the key strengths of AMU? Yes, Adnan says alumni connection. Yes, unity, I don't know, there is a lot of discord also. But yes, Kamran says rich history. Yes. Sense of belonging. Yes, sense of belonging is very much there. That is linked to that alumni connect somebody talked about. Residential facility. Okay. Yes, because of that residential facility, yes, tehzeeb, culture. And you will note all these are soft factors. Maybe residential facility, if you look at the hostels, it is not a soft factor per se, but a hard factor. But actually the bonding that you develop is a soft factor. And Kamran says the aim of its creation, the noble purpose with which the mission, the university has been established. Yes. So yes, somebody said unity and somebody says diversity. That diversity and unity together. Recently, the Prime Minister of India, when he was addressing the AMU community on the 100th celebrations of our centenary celebrations, he used the term for AMU, it is mini India, he said. It is mini India. So all kind of diversities are being reflected here. So you will note that whenever you are talking about a organization which has enduring presence or which lasts for more than beyond the life of the founder, let us put it like this. Institutions are created by some visionary people. So if the organization lasts beyond the founder, it means there is something, in the roots which keeps it strong. And all the factors which you have noted are actually soft factors. For example, you said noble intent, the purpose with which somebody said use the term rich history. The record of, continuous contributions by committed people. So it was not Sir Syed alone. There were a host of persons who continued to rise to the occasion and contribute to make AMU strong. I remember a Vice Chancellor who was Vice Chancellor when I was a student. When I joined this university as a student in 1980, it was a very turbulent phase. And he came here with a very strong will that, yes, I have to set things right. And there was a lot of hangama in the campus because of his strict actions. He cleaned the hostels and he reduced the overstay of residents. Earlier, I saw those students who were here for 15 years, 17 years. They were addicted to the hostel life. They would not leave. They would take up admission from one course to another course. So he introduced clauses like irrelevant courses. For course duration also he fixed the limit, and it created a lot of problems also for him, and he faced a lot of resistance, but he used it, he ran it with an iron hand, and finally when he left the university in 1985, the disgruntled elements even organized a Yom-e-Nijat, as they called it, that they, when they got rid of this man. But when he passed away finally, I think 25 years after he left the campus, somebody wrote an obituary of this man, and he said, Sir Syed built the university, Syed Hamid saved it. Isn't it? So there were people, likewise, our illustrious, one of the illustrious vice chancellor of this place, Zakir Hussain Sahab. You know, when AMU faced its tough time, when the country was partitioned, and there were questions about AMU's contribution and the role it played in the creation of Pakistan, and there was a charge, and almost the fact of the matter is that 60% of the people, the teachers, left for Pakistan, and the institution was devoid of that intellectual lot which it has developed over the years. And at that time, the national leaders like Pandit Nehru requested Zakir Hussain Sahab to take the lead and re-establish AMU's role in the new context in the independent India. And Dr. Zakir Hussain, who was banished from AMU for creating Jamia Millia Islamia here, he became a savior of the institution. So there have been people, a stream of people. So we have to understand there is something. In fact, if I conclude, because the time is now getting over, all these are hinting towards one thing. If I were to conclude this, I would say soft is hard. How institutions survive in the long run? It is not because of the hard things. They survive because of the soft things. Soft things like you have already noted, the noble purpose. आज भी जो सर सैयद ने सोचा तालीम के बारे में, it continues to be relevant. तालीम और तरबियत. तालीम without tarbiyat is incomplete. Now, tarbiyat is a soft word, is a softer side of it. How people learn to live together. And they learn to live together when they stay in hostels. They appreciate diversities. They learn to adjust with somebody whom they may not like, may get along with. There may be occasional fights also, but ultimately the bigger picture dawns and people realize we have to live together. That's tarbiyat. Isn't it? The feeling of connect with the institution, alumni connect, which you talked about. Even now, I have seen so many institutions and alumni of the kind of attachment AMU alumni have with their institution is matchless. Nobody can match that connect. And they continue to revisit and they keep thinking as to what they can do for the institution. So these are the things which actually decide the long run, which organization would survive and which would not. So that's all. I think we conclude the first unit today with this discussion, and now we will take up the specific elements like planning and all. Thank you.